All right, well, we'll jump right into it. I know we've got a short amount of time and a lot of intelligent people up here. So I know the last couple panels we've been listening to very kind of specific segmented parts of robotics and what that means to those industries. But as maybe a way of introduction, we'll just say, what does robotics mean to each of you as you look into the field and get excited about the investments in the space? So we'll start here with Mitch.
What does robotics mean to me?
Yes.
Wow, that's a big statement. It's mean everything from my grown up. I guess I used to watch Japanese cartoon. That's always robots. So that's from beginning. That's robots is inside my heart. It's really changing nowadays because of the sensors, all those new things coming up in the market. I think it's really coming to the age where the robots coexist together with the people, human. So I'm very excited in the market right now.
Thank you. So from Intel Capital perspective, maybe a general short introduction, we invest about $400 million a year in the venture space, cross sectors. Now, robotics sitting cross sector for a few of our business units. If you look at robotics, we always look at the fundamental processing layer. We look at the sensories, either LiDAR or camera or different the sensor layer. And then there's an AI layer in natural language processing, in computer image processing, etc. Overall, all of this sitting on top of the mechanical layer with a servo feedback loop, etc. into different vertical and segment. It could be a service robot, it could be industrial robot, manufacturer robot, etc. But in general, we're looking at robot in an intelligent robot, including the computer AI element of it.
Yeah, I think for us it would be very similar to Intel as a technology sort of enabler. We provide a very similar platform and sort of an integration up the tech stack, if you like. And I think for us it's that sort of combination of sensing the world, thinking about what to do, and then acting. And we find lots of opportunity to invest across that sort of feedback loop. And yeah, all kinds of interesting opportunities around there, particularly in applications, specific niche needs that enterprises need to get solved. And we see lots of exciting things going on there.
Hi, I'm Hidetaka from Global Brain. We're based in Tokyo, headquartered in Tokyo, one of the biggest venture capital, and my main focus is anything that relates to robotics because I like robots, and from industrial robots, social robot, communication robots, remote control robot, anything that impresses me. Yeah.
All right, by background, my name is Paul Ye. I started a new firm recently called Conductive. I spent 4 years at Kleiner Perkins and was lucky enough to kind of leave and start my own fund. Really quick plug, thanks to Panasonic as one of our anchor LPs. So that's why I'm here with a lot of good Japanese connections. The way I think about robots a little bit different. So our new fund focus, it's a $100 million focus on enterprise only. So enterprise software, enterprise hardware. So when I think about robot, it's really thinking about, okay, robots that fly, robots that drive, drones, self-driving cars, robots that help make other robots possible, like 3D printing, but really mostly in the enterprise space. And the reason I'm thinking about that is because the consumer robot space to me is actually very difficult to predict. One of the coolest companies that I am a consumer of is the BB-8, the company that made the toy robots for the Star Wars action figure. And it's a consumer robot, a toy that actually did exceedingly well, which I'm really a big fan of, but it's hard for an investor to call out, hey, this has the virality of a gaming-like robot. So very much focused on enterprise only.
Great, thanks. So I guess the first question that I wanted to ask to kind of the group here is why now? So robots have been around for decades. The space is very defined. But we're starting to see investors, kind of upticks in investment, allocating more of their portfolios. And we're seeing even more investors sitting on the sidelines, kind of watching in, waiting for that moment to jump in. So what is it about the time we're in today that makes it so interesting? And Hide, maybe we'll start with you.
I think the market is ready for that. And also I want to say that it's now, but there's gonna be now for next 10 to 20 years for the investment opportunities, because we don't have enough investors yet. We don't have enough startups yet. So there's gonna be a much more huge market for the robots. And if you look at the humanoid robots that are available right now, they're like just babies, right? So we need to develop more technologies to create Doraemon or Astro Boy or something like that, you know.
Yeah, I think I would sort of go from a different perspective. I think there's a number of really interesting technology trends that are sort of driving a convergence towards these applied AI solutions, where we have companies like Intel and Qualcomm and others providing very effective technology, which has been following Moore's law for the last 55 plus years. And we're actually able to solve problems that maybe computer scientists would have thought were intractable 10, 15, 20 years ago. Like if you had told anybody that there would be a self-driving car on the road in California 15 years ago, they would say, no way. Then 7 years ago, Google said, well, maybe. And then all of a sudden, I can call an Uber in San Francisco. It's kind of cool.
I would tackle it along your line of thinking. In one way, the hardware costs have reduced tremendously. The sensor costs, anywhere from LiDAR to computer vision sensors, everything dropped 10x, 100x. The computing power by Moore's law, right? More powerful and lower power consumption and lower cost. And at the same time, the open source of AI and different, our acquisition of Movides, we, in terms of that processing at the edge, helping robotics to do computer vision at lower power, higher performance, etc. So hardware condition and software condition really help to carve out that capability of a startup at lower cost development.
Maybe I add one more thing. I think adding the Gareth and Elana from a supply point of view. From demand point of view, I see the labor shortage is a huge impact, especially the country like Japan or even here. The people are getting older. We don't have enough laborers, and that's going to be a trigger to the many demands for the robots.
That's great. And maybe kind of looking at that and where it's going to grow in the future. Are you thinking that you're going to see these massive companies that will be cross-border, or will they be fragmented in ways that perhaps there's going to be the winner in the US, there'll be the winner in Japan, the winner in China? How do you see kind of cross-border opportunities developing throughout the space? Maybe we'll start right here with Mitch.
Yeah, I think it's, I start to see more company which does a business globally, like especially for our fund, we focus on Japan and the US. I start to see a lot of robots company from US willing to go to work with a Japanese company from early stage. So I think it's going to be more with the winner take all kind of things, not the regional player comes out.
Does anybody think it's the other way?
So I think it's probably going to be interesting to see how it evolves. Like if you look at historically sort of heavy-duty industrial automation, where you had like a couple of really big players like the ABBs and the Fanooks and the Kukas, we've actually been really impressed by the way we're seeing indigenous companies coming out of countries like China, for example. So we had an interesting experience with consumer robotics in the drone sector, where we've seen DJI out of Shenzhen just build an unstoppable behemoth of a company. Like it's phenomenal, the company they have built. They've gone from 0 to 150 miles an hour in 6 years. And I think we'll see more of that as the market evolves and sort of needs evolve, that we'll find there are very credible, innovative, full-stack technology companies, not just a manufacturing powerhouse, but true leading-edge robotics research and product development coming out of China, coming out of India, coming out of the traditional economies like the US and Japan as well. And I think it's still TBD in terms of who the winners are going to be. I think you'll find that companies will potentially on the enterprise side find a really interesting niche, go in and solve a high value problem, and then that might be very easy to replicate in other geographies. It'll be a question of execution rather than just the idea.
Gareth, I have to take you out for dinner or something, because DJI was one of our deals from Kleiner Perkins back then. So thanks so much for that. Perfect layup. So yeah, I think that the way that we're thinking international-wise, DJI was probably one of the first companies that we saw go from a Chinese kind of fast copycatter that we always think about Chinese companies are, to something that's truly dominating. To the point of, I mean, the company is now 4,000 people strong. They have their own factory where they wind their own motors and vertically integrate everything. You can visit, and what's crazy is at DJI, you can literally go up to one of the floors where they discuss, how to actually make the next generation drone, and then literally after lunch, you'll see a prototype because they're actually going downstairs to 3D print it out and then actually literally show you what potentially will look. Fascinating company. I think that's actually one of the first ones and only ones where I think, hey, the technology from outside of US is really dominating. I do believe that could be the future. I keep remembering when I was growing up, Sony, Panasonic, all these Japanese companies rule the world. I mean, I grew up wanting a Walkman, right? And back then, they dominated everything, regardless of what border they were. So it's almost like an exporting kind of technology. And now, the next generation, you have the iPods of the world that's exporting to every other country. I think similar to robotics, you'll see something like that from other types of countries. Whether it's China or India, I believe that would be the case.
That's great, yeah. It'll be exciting to kind of see who perhaps kind of puts their foothold in first. We've got a lot of entrepreneurs out in the room today. What are maybe some roadblocks that these robotics companies are facing? How early in the cycle are they, or late in the cycle are they really dealing with some of these problems? So, Gareth, I see what you have to say on that.
So I think, a good idea, it's always a good time to raise money for somebody with a good idea. I think one of the issues we see with a lot of people working, particularly on robotic solutions, is finding that really hard to define sort of product market fit for a robot. We've seen a lot of very smart teams try and build a general purpose sort of development platform, and it's very hard to convince somebody to buy one of those, right? If I go out and solve a problem with a very specific robot, that's a much easier sell to your end customer. So I think that would be my first piece of advice, would be go find something that an enterprise or a consumer is willing to pay for, go solve that problem really, really well, and then, as you sort of build your business and you scale into lots of other things over time.
Yeah, I think finding the right customers and educating them, because is one of the issues that they face. Because most of the customers are not familiar with the robots. If you're selling the robots to the automobile industry, it's a piece of cake. But let's say one portfolio company called Life Robotics, which is the making world's first industrial robotics arm without elbow joints. And they're selling a robotics arm into very small areas, like restaurants and cosmetic companies, and some customers that never see the robots in their factories. And we have to educate them what the robots are and how they move and what it looks like. And it takes a lot of time to educate customers.
Just to build on that point, we've seen some really interesting robotic solutions for solving things like labor shortages in fast service food, but a lot of the big food service chains aren't willing to invest in these machines. So in fact, these companies are having to pivot into becoming a restaurant themselves and raising money for a very, very different business, right? They're no longer a technology provider, they're like a full stack meal experience. So I think that's, to your point, you have to make sure you're selling the value prop to your customer.
Actually, can I just poll the audience? Who here are from startups and who are from big companies? Startups, can you raise your hands? Okay. And big companies? Okay. Make sure you guys chat with each other at the session later. And startups, come and find us, so we can back you and be happy to chat more.
So I think some of the experience we had is we have a great CEO. Technology is amazing. And we have a bunch of young, like a PhD from Stanford, Berkeley, come and wants to work with that kind of company. The issue is the middle layer is not there exist. So what happened is that when the product is out, okay, let's make it. But we don't know how to do the supply chain, and we don't know how to do the quality control. In the end, the quality of the product is not up to the level customer wanted. And that we have to do it again. So it was a lot of problems. So I think it's important to have a leadership and a good engineer, but also the middle guy who can do the supply chain and all those dirty work to help manage the company go through. I think that's important too.
Second, Mitch, in terms of a lot of robotic company, if they haven't have enough kilometer running in the real life circumstances, for instance, for a retail robotic example, if you don't have the robot running in a superstore with customer shopping alongside of you, you don't have that sort of a PR response of, yes, we're going to save efficiency on labor, increasing scanning accuracy, we're going to do promising all that, but what's a PR with a superstore maybe cutting job, right, replaced by robot. So there's a lot of different kind of challenge faced by robotic, increasing productivity, increasing accuracy, having that goal delivered.
And I guess when you think of that, is it the large corporates that are going to be my first customers as a robotics company? Is it going to be early stage companies investing in early stage companies? When people are thinking of these, it's difficult. I guess what we're saying here is to educate some of these folks on how to use the robotics properly. Maybe at Intel, do you have any kind of thoughts on who's first at bat?
We like to, when we look at the robotics, there's definitely a fragmented market. There's the industrial robotics, there's manufacturer robotics, service robotics, consumer-facing robotics. We like to see robotics with a certain use case traction to your earlier point that at a certain use case, you already have product market fit. You have the paying customer. It could be a large corporate customers that actually are using your robot and showing me what kind of ROI you have. That's kind of maybe more of Series B, like a late Series A, Series B type of company that have product market fit. On the other hand, we do look at earlier stage as well. I think one of the airwear drone company we invested in, that's a more relatively early stage. They were finding the enterprise drone flying use case. Eventually they landed in, they switched business model from horizontal sort of platform to a vertical insurance solution or oil and gas solution, drone inspection, those type of pivot. We saw some of those happening for the earlier stage company.
And I think it's becoming pretty clear as well that there's a number of customers out there who would not historically have bought robots, right? If you look at, I think the next panel today is agriculture, and there's a whole bunch of berry companies in places like Salinas and Monterey who are super concerned about the lack of labor, and they're trying to find any kind of automation they can to sort of solve that problem for them. You know, similarly, just last Friday, I went to see this amazing robot that's working on a drywalling solution, and their customers are going to be like home constructors, office constructors. They're not going to be selling to anybody who's ever bought a robot before. So I think it's very, very different, right? You're sort of this whole question of how you go out and find your customer and solve their problem is becoming pretty interesting.
And is anybody thinking that the large corporates are actually coming up with solutions on their own and plugging them into their own infrastructure, or how do we see that evolving over time?
So I think looking at this panel, we all invest in early stage companies because we believe the small guy will beat the big guy every time.
So sorry to all the folks in the room that are coming from big companies. I'm going to say something that's not very popular, but I think that big companies is where innovation go and die. I grew up in, I kind of went through all over the place, but before I joined Kleiner, I was at 2 different EV startups, including Tesla and Fisker. And before that, I was actually working at Ford in Detroit, where I grew up actually living next to these massive KUKA robots that are locked in within a cage because they'll take your head off. Every time we want to implement something, Ford, and I know Drago's very well from the prior panel, so I can say this without him getting mad at me. So anytime we would propose something, there were just so many hurdles to go out to kind of overcome, to the point of, hey, labor issues. If we are implementing some extra station that will lessen the workload or something, all of a sudden the UAW union, United Auto Workers, come and say and slap my hand and says, hey, you can't do this because I need my lighting guy to actually screen the light bulb or whoever to do XYZ things that you cannot do. So I'm like, how do you want me to innovate? Like, you want me to just sit here and basically like do what you said? And the answer is yes, we want you to do that. So quickly learned that's actually very difficult for you to survive. And unfortunately, I do see that's actually how big companies work. I think that it takes, it's very difficult for big companies to innovate quickly, and so many reasons are just inherent. I think there's a lot of bureaucracy issues, a lot of speed, lack thereof speed. And I think that, looking at most of the companies today, there's just a lot of hierarchy to overcome. What that means to me is actually there's a lot of potential for innovation elsewhere. And these big companies are, I would say, if you find the right one who are actually open to review and look at these type of partnerships and potentially partner without kind of meddling and just jump in and own the whole thing. Actually, I think that's a good start. It really takes a special blend of characters to be able to do that. So I think so much of it comes from the top. If the top level says, hey, we want innovation, we're ready for it, we're doing all the things we can to go after it, then yeah, you have a shot. If not, if the person that grew up, all the way to the top came from a different background where they believe, hey, process automation is all I need. I don't need computer vision. I just need the robot to do A and B, and that's it. I don't want the robot to learn, and I don't want the robot to actually improve. Then you really can't even pitch AI. So it depends.
And maybe going off of that, so is robotics really a hardware product, or is it the software behind it? And maybe kind of see where that...
I think it's both. I mean, the hardware piece is actually, I think we got that down. You look at the, Fanuc, the Yaskawas of the world, you can get A to B repeatability from 0.01 millimeter repeat thousands and thousands of times. I think that's done. And when earlier you asked us about robotics, everyone here on the panel talked about intelligence. I think that's what we're really looking at. Intelligence comes a lot from the software piece. The hardware piece is the necessary evil for you to deploy. You can't really have one without the other. So you still have to build the hardware. Without hardware, it's like the way to think about it is your iPhone, right? You have all the apps. If you don't have an iPhone to run it on, the apps are worthless.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, I think I would totally agree. In super highly constrained circumstances, yeah, the hardware piece is locked down. I think when you get out into the very messy real world we find outside the front door of the museum here, it gets a lot more challenging. And that's where I think there still is some room for hardware innovation around new sensor modalities, ways you fuse those sensors together. But totally agree. Software is where the true differentiation will be over time, and how you sort of build a sort of perception and understanding and intelligence model that allows you to do all kinds of exciting things with your robot.
Just to build on that from the software side, I completely agree. I think hardware eventually will commoditize. Software, yeah, from software angle, there's from the automated navigation piece to the understanding the world around you, from the people object detection perspective to natural language processing to how do you get proprietary data source and develop based on the AI algorithm to develop actionable insights so your robot can learn from the robot experience rather than purely rule-based logic from human program.
And just to build on that, I think it brings up some really interesting questions around system architecture, because depending on what your robot is doing and how time critical or safety critical its activities are, does it make sense to partition things so that all your intelligence is in the cloud? How much can you squeeze into the edge? Like things like Movidius are super interesting because they allow you to bring that intelligence and that ability to do truly autonomous stuff right at the edge of the network, which is a real challenging problem in any kind of, you're just so resource constrained, right? Power, weight, speed, whatever it might be.
And so if we're moving more towards the edge, right, the intelligence is getting there. How intelligent is my robot today, and how fast do you guys anticipate that change in pace?
So again, I think it depends. Like if you look at I hope nobody from iRobots in the audience, but you look at like a classic Roomba, not that smart, right? It doesn't have that much intelligence at the edge. But you look at what companies like Cruise Automation was one of our investments, exited to GM very successfully about a year and a half ago. They're doing essentially level 4, level 5 full autonomy with a 3,000-pound autonomous vehicle. So, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of capability in that particular device. But I think it depends on the application, definitely.
Well, I guess maybe changing gears a little bit. So I'm at one of these large corporations, and I want to think of some innovative ways to build a team. I hear over and over again from VCs, we invested in the people. So is there a founding team that you guys look for specifically in robotics, maybe some skill sets or things that people might be interested in hearing.
So, well, nothing specifically for robotics. I think all the investment in the end, it's true, the same. But especially the kind of things we're looking now is the industry knowledge and the network, which is key. Because in the end, you have to sell the products to the industry. And if you have a network inside there, you have much easier sales, right? So actually the person who has experience working in the industry for a long time, which is a big plus from our investment point of view.
Second, that completely agree. It's the investment in general. The team we're looking at definitely are committed and innovative team, right? That can really get the product out there and have the grade to find the product market fit, and also to grow with the different stage of the company. It's early stage, C stage, A, B, C, we'll probably need different teams. From that scalability challenge of how initially find a one anchor customer to how do you scale out to multiple customer, to how do you scale out to drive down the cost to be more efficient deployment, etc. So it's all have different requirements from the team elements. But in general, we're looking for very committed and innovative team.
Yeah, I mean, we've had, I think, it's been interesting to see how some very early movers in this sector have really been almost like, they've catalyzed like an ecosystem and sort of a group of very smart founders. Willow Garage, which was a sort of seminal Silicon Valley robot startup, closed its doors maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But a whole bunch of the team that came out of Willow Garage have gone on to found really, really interesting robot companies in the Valley and elsewhere. So we often look for some kind of lineage or heritage like that. We have a number of sort of research groups in the usual suspects like Carnegie Mellon and MIT and UPenn's Grasp Lab and places like that where we often go knock on the door and see what's going on. So really it's very much driven by that network of people we know who are doing interesting things.
Yeah, it really depends on which stage you're at. And at early stage, like seed round, founding CEO can be just a super engineers, and it doesn't matter because you're not selling your product yet. Because it's going to take quite a lot of time for hardware startups and robotic startups to develop their product. But once it's ready, you have to sell and start marketing. So by the time you need to have a business person with it. Yeah, so it just depends on where you are.
All right, so we have a thing back at Kleiner Perkins where John Doerr, our big boss, said we want to invest in missionaries, not mercenaries. So a lot of that, is what all the other speakers mentioned. But I guess it's really, if you actually find someone who's, dumped their life savings into the company, who's ready to, do or die, they're going to try and make us as successful as they possibly can. On the hardware side, we also add that there should be a technical bent to the founders. A lot of it is they have to, because hardware is hard, right? We all know that. Comes back to, hey, if you actually start a company before, build a product before, it already puts you miles ahead because now you know what things to avoid, what things to do and what not to do. So that's actually really important as well.
And we know here in Silicon Valley, employees have a lot of opportunities for different verticals, different spaces. Are you starting to see a demand for people to be working in robotics? I know there was some OEMs up here earlier, and we've heard in the market, they're hiring kind of all the roboticists in the space. So how do you see some of your, funded companies being able to build their teams the way that we've spoken about?
We definitely see that from the end market focus perspective, that particular use case have that domain expertise as part of the team DNA is super helpful in terms of understanding a lot of nitty-gritty potential roadblocks for a certain vertical segment. They all face different challenges. And also, when you talk about intelligent robot, a lot of times that proprietary data source from a certain industry that tied to the training of the data and later scoring the model, and how do you make the robot intelligent that tied to the vertical expertise.
And there's no denying that it's very challenging in the Bay Area because anybody who has that machine learning sort of skill set, they can go work at a Facebook or a Google and make $1 billion in a couple of years. So it certainly is challenging for startups. I think we see that a lot of our companies have, they do smart things. Like they maybe put a development center somewhere else. They might have their technical team in Israel or a technical team in Eastern Europe, which allows them to sort of capitalize on the human capital that is there without having to compete right here in the Bay Area for all the, crazy benefits that these other companies can offer.
And one thing I wanted to maybe talk with Hide about, because we were talking backstage about how you have investments in both US and Japan, and how are you seeing companies think differently here versus overseas in Japan, and I guess how are they approaching the robotics problem in a different way?
Yeah, robotics industry, traditional robotics industry is used to be dominated by Japanese large corporations, and it is. But I see more robotics focused startups in the United States than Japan, because we don't have many Japanese entrepreneurs coming out of the large corporations. So that's something that I have to, try. And most of the startups that I meet is based in here.
I think it's not robotics, but in general, the Japanese entrepreneurship environment has changed dramatically last couple of years, and the quality of the entrepreneur is much better compared with 5, 6, 10 years ago. So I'm very optimistic with the Japanese entrepreneurship, and I think there are quite interesting. There's always technologies over there in Japan. Just don't know how to create the technology to the business. But we start to see a lot of the people who are able to do that come and join the company, startup company, to start building it. So I think there will be a lot more interesting startup from Japan, robotic startup coming up from there.
I think we need to educate those potential entrepreneurs in Japan as well.
Yeah, actually, Hide and Mitch. So the question I have is, so I was born and raised in Asia, in Taiwan, and growing up is very much, hey, you listen to your elders. My mom told me what I needed to study and what to do until I finally said, no more. But how do you actually promote that entrepreneurship in Japan? Because that's what I would love. I mean, I would love to see Asia thrive. I would love to see all these amazing technology to come up and not, hey, the big boss at the end of the table says yes or no, and you have all the great idea, but if the big boss doesn't say yes or no, then you don't do it.
It's nothing to do robotics, but it's a very interesting topic. I think it's change on the lifetime employment. It's actually used to believe and trust whatever boss say yes, and you be able to retire and should be able to get enough pension to survive after that. But that doesn't exist anymore. So what's the point of listening to your senior executive, which the company maybe is going to run out the money eventually. So I think it's really the change is happening now, and it's slowly. But the biggest things that the entrepreneur has to go through is go through wife and the mother, and that's always the case. I don't know any here, but in Japan that's the real boss.
But I guess we've got microphones for questions in the group, and I'll kick it off here. But looking at robotics as a service, as a platform play, and we've seen everything move to the SaaS models. How are you thinking of robotics in that sense, right? Putting hardware out there, but receiving some sort of subscription models.
That is a very interesting model. Definitely, the adding to hardware, software, I think data is a key. If you can gather the data and you can start providing new services on top of that, that'll be very exciting company we're looking for. And if you're a startup, you're doing all those three, please come and talk to me later. And anyway, I think that the robot as a service is a platform where you can gather the data and then you start doing the many other different kind of things on top of that. So it's very interesting.
We do look at robotics as a great tool for data capturing. So from that angle, how do you monetize the data? This could be very disruptive for a lot of traditional business models. And the new SaaS model come in, it could drop the previous cost by 10x, performs a better accuracy by 100x. So there's a lot of disruptive business model coming out from this data capturing.
Yeah, totally agree. I think we are big believers in robot as a service, as a business model. I think there are places where it will work and places where it won't work. And I do think that as you sort of think about what a company grows into, I don't think any hardware company will ever be able to command the multiple that a SaaS software company does, right? It will be some kind of blended, weird sort of like multiple they get on their exit, whether it's in the public markets or to an acquirer. But we see a number of robot companies that are trying to do this robot as a service, which are claiming they're just like a, I don't know, pick like a Slack or somebody along these lines at a 45x. Like, nah, not quite.
Yeah, like Mitch said, I think data is the money, but we haven't figured out how to use those data. So that's the challenge that we have to overcome for the next step.
Great. I think we have a question over here.
Hi, Mitch from Enotech Consulting. Generally speaking, robot is hard for venture capital. I guess it takes longer and it doesn't scale as quickly. So how are you handling that measurement piece? Do you use a different measurement for robotics or hardware companies, or you just totally avoid the hardware, or just invest into software? How do you handle that?
So we measure the same way based on revenues and margins and earnings. So, which is very basic. If your company makes money, great. I would love to invest. If not, then let's figure out how much burn it's going to take. Having been this VC side of investing large amounts, where at the prior firm I was at, Kleiner, we're used to investing $1 billion, for the fund. So it's actually not quite. It's very understandable when it comes to hardware. It takes more money, more capex, but you can still have great outcome. So Nest, the thermostat company, right? That actually got sold to Google for $3.2 billion. It's a hardware company. It did take more capital than kind of the traditional gaming company, but it also took off really well because they had really great sales. So I wouldn't say, hey, I value it less harshly or easier because I'll give them the benefit of doubt their hardware. It's more along the lines of, hey, you still have to make money. Your timing may be different. Instead of reaching profit break even within 18 months, you reach it 24 months. That's okay, but it's not like, hey, I can wait for 10 years.
And I would say as well, I think you look at sources of capital like Intel Capital, like Qualcomm Ventures. As a corporate fund, we don't have that artificial 10-year horizon that every institutional investor in the world has to deal with. So we can often be, I think, a good source of that sort of long-term partnership that Paul talked about previously, right? Where we can help with channel, we can help with market, and we can help with the dollar you can get from everybody else. And I think there is, so that's one aspect, it's like a continuum of investors. And sometimes corporates will definitely be a better partner for a hardware company than a straight financial investor.
I think we had a question over here.
Hi, my name is Michael. So I found it interesting how you said that times are changing, and they really are. I'm a mechatronics engineer, and I've worked for KUKA Robotics for many years, putting robots into operating rooms. So I know the technology. Started working as a freelancer 5 years ago. So without even having a startup, I'm able to globally act and get parts all over the world. So I made a robotic waiter. I got the parts in Shenzhen. I got the design in Germany. The initial crowdfunding or microfunding was 20K from the UK, and yet I have a professional product that I was able to bring here to San Francisco. So it takes quite a lot of creativity, and now that's also the challenge because I see so many use cases. I don't have a co-founder, I don't have a mentor, I'm just getting to startups. What do you think the right approach is for people like me that have many ideas, but sort of like, you do something and then you think, oh, there's the next thing, and how do you finish it? How do you pass it on to the people that can make it happen?
I think as a sole founder, probably the most convincing thing you can do for one of us on the stage is convince somebody to join your team, right? If you can sell your vision to a second co-founder or your first hire and sort of sell them on what you're trying to do, that's a pretty sort of leading indicator for people like us, I think.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we're running out of time, but I think I learned today that I should go find a couple of my really good friends, convince them to create a company here and find an exact use case. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.